So welcome everybody. Drew Harris here, Fractional CTO, and with Fractional Copilot today, we have Karina with us, and Karina is really a pioneer in the field of fractional space. So, Karina, would you care to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. So Karina Mikhli, I started out as a fractional COO before fractional was a word. Um, Fell into this, and then in 2023, I went full time with one of my clients, which sometimes happens. Came back to fractional in 2023, saw that it was lonelier and harder than the last time I was in fractional. Started looking for community because I knew the power of community from having joined some great online operations communities during COVID. Couldn't
Sure.
find it, decided to see if there was interest, started Fractionals United, and there was interest. So it's grown very quickly. We're over 14,000 members in a little over 2 years.
Nice, nice. Now, for our listeners and people who are watching this video, how can people find out more and learn about and maybe join the Fractionals United community if they are fractional and they're interested in having that relationship, that support system that you and I both know works so well?
Sure. So all you need to do is go to fractionalsunited.com. There is an application form on there. My team reviews it on a pretty frequent basis. We do define fractional as a senior leadership role. So
Hmm.
we look for generally director above, and you have managed a team. And we're open to both current fractionals and senior leaders, considering fractional, curious about fractional, which there are many of, and that's a good thing.
Sure, sure. So help us all understand better. I know you're the expert here. What is a fractional versus like just a consultant or even a contractor? What is the difference and what does that look like?
So first off, it's not better, right? They're all valid. I do both. Like I'm both a fractional COO and a workflow consultant. It's just that they're very different.
Okay.
Biggest difference. So the three main categories that get the most confused are fractional, consultant, and interim.
Okay.
Contractor is just another word, I think, for like 1099, and that could be any of the above, right? It's like it's W-2 or contractor. W-2 is like full-time employee, and contractor is anyone who's 1099, right? At least in
Okay.
the US. I'm not going to talk to like the
Yeah,
EU.
sure.
Um, so if we're looking at fractional, consultant, and interim, the biggest difference is whether you are embedded and long term or not, right? So if you're a consultant, you're not embedded, right? You are hired for a project, whether it's a short term project or a long term project. You're like external to the team, right? You have a remit, you have a scope, you do it, you move on.
Mhm.
Whereas fractionals and interims are embedded. You are part of the leadership team, right? You have a seat on, like a place on the org chart. You have people reporting to you. You are part of the leadership team. The difference between a fractional and interim, though, is the interim, as the name implies, is like a stopgap, right? You're doing this for a period and generally full time until they hire someone to do this long term. Whereas a fractional is part time but long term.
Okay. Okay. So how long term? Like what do those contracts look like? Let's kind of go down that avenue and then I want to come back to how do people get started in this and how
Okay.
did you get started in it? So let's talk about like when you're in an engagement, you say it's long term. Like I'm sure that varies from person to person.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but from your experience, what does that engagement period look like?
So it's anything, and this varies from function and this varies from instances, right? Like
Mhm.
we have someone in the community, a fractional CFO who has been with the client for like 13 years.
Oh,
Like
wow.
that's not the norm.
Okay.
But it's a small business, and like one of the advantages of having a fractional is you have that high level of expertise
Hmm.
and like strategic partner at a fraction of the cost, right? Like if you're a small business, you don't need a CFO full time. You don't need most of us full time, right? You just
Right.
need us there to manage, more junior resources, to help lead, all the other reasons why fractionals are advantageous.
Right.
So, if a small business has an accountant, has a bookkeeper, like you don't need a CFO more than X amount. And like she provides enormous value and it has worked, so why change it?
Mhm.
So she's been with them for 13 years.
Okay.
You
Okay.
know, for instance, with a COO like myself, one of a couple of things tends to happen is like I have worked myself out of a job numerous times. Either like I put in the systems and people in place and they don't need me, right?
Yeah.
Or they need someone full time and I help, replace myself with someone full time. So it really does vary from function to function. But I would say the average is probably anywhere from 6 months to 2 to 3 years, depending.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I've observed too. I've been a consultant in the past. I've ran my own company in the past. I've worked in corporate America in the past as an employee, and now I'm kind of back to that consulting fractional sort of engagement. And I think for each of us, it depends on what your offer is and what that
Right.
offer looks like. And it can vary from person to person and whatever. But one of the things that I've noticed, you talked about, CFOs and COOs in the tech space that I'm in, where I specialize in working with SaaS companies. And I'm in the product and the engineering space. So I'm a CPO and a CTO to organizations, and I really focus on growth. That's my specialty, is
Hmm.
helping them grow and scale and getting to, some sort of milestone. So my engagements are more limited in scope. Yeah, definitely, 4 to 6 months is
Yeah,
typically that
yeah.
sweet spot for me. And a lot of these companies, you're totally right. Even in the tech space, is you get maybe some non-technical founders who have done something interesting with AI, and they're trying to launch it as a product, and all they really have is a point of a proof of concept. And they need somebody who's more mature, more
Yeah,
seasoned to come
yeah,
in and to really guide them and to help them, set up that system in a way that it's sustainable and it can scale and it can grow without falling on its face in front of the customers.
yeah.
So that's a little bit from my world. It sounds like you have similar experiences in the areas that you've worked in and encountered other people. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And like part of like their my model is like I do this like phase out basically 3, 2, 1. And I often come to them and tell them when, it's ready for the next stage because like at some point everything is running smoothly and they need less of my time and I will be the first to tell them that, because I consider myself their partner, right? I'm there for their to
sure.
help them achieve whatever and to their advantage. And I think, that is one of the advantages, like we are our own, like as employees. And it's funny, we had this conversation in the early days of the community where
Okay.
like I didn't realize this was a thing till like people were talking about it. And I'm like, oh yeah, I saw that happen. When I went from fractional to W2, there was a subtle shift in the CEO where I was the same person, but she started treating me differently because
Really?
like I belonged to her, right? Like I was W2. I was no longer that skilled partner. So it's I'm sure
Huh.
she's not even aware. Like it was it's this
Sure.
like what do they call it? This like unrecognized bias, right?
Yeah.
So we are seen as expert partners, right? And that's what we bring to the table.
Okay. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So here's a question, since we're talking about the engagement and sort of the end of the engagement. So for our listeners, how do you know once you've become a fractional and you have a gig and you're working on a gig, how do you know that it's time to end it? And then when you end it, like what does that transition look like? Obviously to you, you became an employee at one point. So that's one possible transition.
Right.
I would assume another is to become an advisor where you're
Yeah.
just sort of advising them once a month or every other week. And, it's like, hey, I'm still going to stay in touch. And maybe it's I've hired my replacement and you're moving
Yeah.
on. I don't know. Like what other things have you encountered and what does those look like?
All of those are possibilities. I also have like a maintenance stage where I go, way more fractional and just, things escalate and I still lead and troubleshoot, but I'm like not involved as much because everything's running smoothly. So
Hmm.
it depends on your function, right? Because for a CTO and a COO and a CFO and a CMO, all of that is going to look different, right?
Sure.
But at the point where like I think back to my point is like I'm not in it to make, like, yes, we have to make money and pay our bills, but if you're a partner, like you see whether, you're providing value, right? And if your time and input is no longer needed, I would be proactive about having that conversation and phasing out and deciding what that next level looks like so that it is, you know, to both parties' advantage, right? So whether it's like advisory because you're only needed once a quarter or once a month, or if it's a maintenance level, or if they need more and you don't want to give more, then yes, definitely find your replacement, right? And help
Right.
transition. Like we're professionals, right? You want to leave, like reputation is everything, right? You
Yeah,
don't want to leave
absolutely.
on a bad note. You don't want to yeah, you want to make sure that, your clients are happy and getting value and do whatever it takes for that.
Right, right. Yeah, so I think some of the same sort of things would apply in how you would create your offer
Yeah,
and present that value and
yeah.
then sell yourself, market yourself, sell yourself.
Yep.
It's all about relationships. I mean, for
Oh yeah.
me, anyhow,
Yeah.
building the network, building the relationships, establishing yourself in the industry for the right audience as
Yes.
an authority.
Yeah.
How do people get started in this? Like, what are some of the good stories that you've heard about how people get started in fractional and get their first gig?
So I don't know if there are good stories. It's hard. Like I'm gonna be honest, it's still very challenging. As much as it's grown more on the supply side, unfortunately, than on the demand side. Like it's going to change. There is definitely more demand and there will be that inflection point. I don't know when. And it makes sense. So it is the way of the future. It's not going anywhere. But
Hmm.
currently, most of the people who need us still don't know we exist. And
Hmm.
that is a challenge. So there actually is the first successful fractional job board, fractionaljobs.io, founded by Taylor Crane. And before he did this, they were like two or three within a couple of months that started and folded like really quickly. Mind you, they were doing it for the wrong reasons. Like they were
Hmm.
trying to get on the, a band, like something that was like popular and they weren't fractional themselves. So
Right.
Taylor is, and he's doing it for the right reasons. But right now, the only way to find the work and do this is, like you said, relationships and networking and biz dev. So it is not easy and it's not quick.
Sure.
For anyone starting, I would say a couple of things. Don't limit yourself to just fractional, right? Like if you're considering doing this and still have a job, keep your job and, start networking and laying the groundwork on the side because you don't know how long it's going to take.
Sure.
And the more runway you have and the more income you have, the more time you have to find the right, you know, fractional engagement and not just take the first one or anything to pay the bills. So if you have an option to do more than one thing, do more than one thing. I'm still a consultant. We all do other things,
Mhm.
whether because it's easier to have multiple revenue streams and because it's interesting and we want to do more than one thing. But no, it's unfortunately going to take time and it's going to take, um, for introverts like me, it's not easy, right? It's like you have to figure out a way to put yourself out there. Start by letting everyone know that this is something you're interested in. You know,
Okay.
Definitely figure out who your target market is, and niche down, which I know is counterintuitive, but the more specific you can be about who you want to help, the more memorable you are. And that's something I had to learn the hard way because it is very
Sure.
counterintuitive.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I had to learn that myself. When I did consulting before, and I say consulting because it wasn't called fractional 15 years ago. Um, when I did that before, I had already a good base, a good set of people that was just always kind of coming to me for work, and it was a very natural transition for me. This time around, it's been a lot more challenging because
Yeah,
I don't have that source, so I've had to develop it. And that
yeah.
whole niche down thing, Alex Hermosi is a great author. He has a couple of books, $100 million offers and
Hmm.
$100 million leads. And because I'm not a marketing person, it's been really helpful for me to read those and practice those, put those things into practice. Um, but figuring out who is my ideal customer and then
Yep.
targeting those people, getting them in my network, getting that sort of permission to continue to contact them and to build those relationships, to have conversations. Eventually that pays off. And like you said, I think the longer runway that you have, the better the end result is going to be.
Yeah.
I think Alex was in a podcast, Alex Ramosi, I was talking about a minute ago, said, the longer you can delay compensation, the better you'll get paid in the end. And he told a story about some founder that delayed compensation, started a business and delayed compensation for like 14 years. But then he
Wow.
became a billionaire like overnight. So,
Oh my God.
I can't do it for 14 years.
No.
Most people can't. But I think that there's a moral in that story of, giving yourself enough runway, having multiple revenue streams. And then I think to shift gears just a little bit, something else that you mentioned was time management.
Yeah.
You alluded to that, like you talked about biz dev. So one of the things that I've heard in the fractional communities where I have conversations with people on a regular basis is that you need to be spending at least 30% of your time doing biz dev. Now I'm sure that varies from person to person, but what's your 2 cents on this? Because you have more experience as a fractional than I do, and you're definitely a pioneer in the field. What would you suggest to people and the time that they need to reserve for that portion of their work?
Yeah, I've heard 30% as well. And, I wish I could say less is better, but no, unfortunately. Um, that is the challenge is like, you know, juggling doing the work with keeping a pipeline and figuring out a way that, um, and there are ways, like whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, definitely being part of communities, figuring out other places where your ICPs hang out. Like there are ways to do it that are less painful. And I
Mm,
think everybody needs to figure out some ways to do it that it is kind of just a sustainable practice, right? Um, I forget which book, like the problem with reading lots of things is you forget where things are
I
come
understand.
from. But someone somewhere suggested that a good habit to get into is like every week, just reconnect with 5 people.
Mm.
like reach out to 5 people in your network to say hi, to share something. So,
Yeah.
like there are small like things like that that you
Mhm.
can just build into your routine, and
Sure.
having, like maybe like if you do 5 reach outs and like 3 coffee chats and whatever, right? Like something sustainable that doesn't feel overwhelming, but that, you know, lets you do the thing that you need to do for the long term.
Right, right. That's great advice. Thank you so much. Um, I want to talk for just a second. I know we're about out of time here. Is collaboration. You mentioned at the beginning that it can be lonely, and that's one of the advantages of joining a community like Fractionals United. Um, and people, I think coming into this, they need to understand and appreciate that you are sort of on your own. You're going to be embedded with a team and you will have that team, but it's different. It's very
Yeah.
different. And having a community of people to work with is important. Um, One of the things that I've talked to other fractionals about are collaboration opportunities where, hey, you're a COO, I'm a CTO. Maybe there's opportunities for us to work together because we're generally working for companies that aren't ginormous, that, can't afford a full-time C-level staff. So
Mhm.
augmenting one another and providing those services to small businesses. Have you had opportunities to work alongside other fractionals? Um,
I wouldn't say, well, it's not technically alongside. Like as a COO, I have hired, fractional CFOs and CMOs where my clients needed it. And I know that there are 2 things that exist. One, people will create referral networks for that same purpose, right? Like if you share a niche, and you work adjacent to each other, people will create trusted referral networks because for that thing, right? Like if you're in there and you see a need like this, you have, a few trusted referral partners that you can bring in and recommend, right? And
right.
sometimes you get a cut, sometimes you don't. It's whatever. Like I've seen it both ways. Some people just do it give to get. Others will get like a percentage. The other thing that exists is there are fractional agencies, so whether because you don't want to do the biz dev, and you're willing to give an agency a cut, or you just want to be part of, a collective or a group,
Sure.
fractional agencies exist as well. So both of those are different ways I've seen people collaborate.
Okay, excellent. And then I always like to ask this question is like, what would you like to leave the audience with? Do you have any books or communities or what sort of wisdom would you like to leave sort of as a last moment thing with our audience today?
I guess what I would say is that it all boils down to the people you know. And um, if this is what you want to do, know it's not easy now. It will get easier. Um, and if you surround yourself with the right people, it'll be easier.
Mm,
And I am proud that, I feel like I was just in the right place, the right time. But, FRUN, which is what we call Fractionals United, because it's a long it's long to say it all the time.
sure.
Front is full of really giving, supportive leaders who are happy to help. And I'm proud to be part of it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for listening today.